Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of Roger Quarter videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. In this D&D review, we're going to take a look at the campaign adventure Scarlet Citadel, which is available on the Roll20 marketplace, as well as the Kobold Press website. If you enjoy these reviews and enjoy watching fun weekly live plays and other D&D content, you consider supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. So Scarlet Citadel was designed by Steve Winter and published by Kobold Press, I believe, several years ago at this point. Finally getting around to doing the review. If you're not familiar with third-party D&D provider Kobold Press, you can, in fact, watch several of my reviews, but also you can watch an entire campaign that I ran for patrons of Empire of the Ghouls. Kobold Press has not done a whole lot of full-length campaigns. They tend to do smaller kind of adventure path size, maybe Lost Mine of Fendelver size adventure modules. Scarlet Citadel is one of the few that is a longer campaign, but it's a lot different from most, for example, 5th edition campaigns in that it all takes place within a single dungeon. So obviously the biggest similarity there would be Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which is a level, I believe, 5 through 20 mega dungeon that's beneath Waterdeep. Also, as a comparison, we can look at Tomb of the Nine Gods, which is the climactic final dungeon of Tomb of Annihilation, which is several levels and is, of course, inspired by the Tomb of Horrors. Scarlet Citadel is a 6-level mega dungeon, and it doesn't, I don't think, do much with the. So a problem with the mega dungeon as a concept, as a subgenre or whatever of a campaign, is it usually has kind of a weaker story because it's just all about dungeon crawling. On the other hand, I think a lot of us would acknowledge the fact that 5th edition mechanics and D&D mechanics in general work best in a dungeon crawl. Like every single game mechanic seems to serve the party, adventuring through dungeons. So in that case, the mega dungeon has a lot going for it. And I think there is stuff here that a good DM could make interesting with some story changes here and there. I was hoping, at least based on my experience with Kobold Press, that there would be more story stuff and it would be more satisfying, and it doesn't necessarily scratch that itch for me. But ultimately, I am very positive about this, with the caveat that it is still that mega dungeon crawl and kind of has all those hangups. But compared to something like Dungeons of the Mad Mage, for example, I think this actually does a much better job, although the scope isn't as big. This is a level 1 through 10 campaign. And if you've played any of Kobold Press's stuff, you know that their monsters and their general balance is a lot more challenging and grittier. I'm going to try not to say the Dark Souls of D&D here, but I think folks who have played through a lot of 5th edition, especially the 2014 rules, I think 2024 is maybe trying to rebalance things a bit, but it's still pretty new at this point. You know that the players are like superheroes and can best a lot of monsters. And maybe the CR ratings are not as good for whatever reason. Like they can just kind of kick ass generally. The Kobold Press monsters tend to expand a lot of monster capabilities, give them more hit points, and do a lot that makes them a lot more challenging. So do note that as written, it even says that this adventure is designed for 4 party members at specific levels, but each of those levels, it's going to be a challenge for them. And there's moments where they literally cannot tackle it and they have to like run away and regroup and all that. If that sounds very appealing for your group, then you can run this as is. If your group is used to maybe playing D&D and kicking ass and enjoying that aspect, then just note that you may have to tweak some balance stuff. Or maybe you've got 5 players or 6 players, in which case that the balance may already be there to begin with. And I wouldn't even want to start at level 1, frankly, anyway. But if you start at level 3, you may actually be a little too high level because it is designed for the lower level to start. I was very impressed with how it's presented in Roll20, though, especially because it seems like a lot of care went into having this face towards DMs and parties who are actually new to D&D, maybe because just a dungeon crawl is frankly fairly easy to run and especially well suited to a virtual tabletop, right? Where it's just all the map, you have to worry about, overland traveling and come up with a bunch of maps for like, forest battle or road battle or whatever. It's just, no, we're all in dungeon. You've got your maps, which yes, the map art is amazing. And I will show that to you later on. But it also goes above and beyond and just gives you a lot of extra cool stuff like this little splash page, which is pretty cute. you meet in a tavern, which that kind of tells you how deep the story is here. It does show off some of the Kobold, the Midgard races. Oh, I should mention this takes place in the Kobold Press original world of Midgard, which is kind of their version of the Forgotten Realms, but also includes a whole lot of like the Norse pantheon exists there. All the typical like fantasy stuff exists there, but also a lot of races we might not be as accustomed to, like Bear Folk, Raven Folk, Shadow Fae, Gearforged is a race. So it does take place in Midgard, but unlike Empire of the Ghouls, which provides a huge amount of Midgard information and lore and allows you to see a lot of the world, this is a very, very small slice. Picture the original Diablo, where it's like there's the town of Tristram, and then there's the giant like catacomb dungeon. That's basically what this is. You've got like one town, and then your big dungeon. So you're not really going to see a lot of the setting or get a real flavor for all of that. But it does come with a lot of great things to help teach DMs on how to run this, specifically via Roll20, where it has information about how to set up like dynamic lighting and how to make sure all the different tokens have the right lighting set out. Literally step-by-step guides, which I was very impressed with. Stuff that I've been using Roll20 for almost 10 years now, so I don't have to be reminded of this, but this is very nice to have for folks who are not nearly as familiar with this stuff. So this would make actually a great kind of introductory dungeon, a campaign adventure for folks wanting to run something that's longer and actually have their players reach higher levels. Although again, you're only going to reach kind of this almost the standard like high level of 5e, which is around level 11 by the end or so. But it just lets you, hey, here's how dynamic lighting works, and here's how you can, give examples of vision. This is all from the Dungeon Master's tutorial page, which is really nice. So I appreciate all this, how to do rollable tables, how to do overlays, which there is different parts of these maps which have literal entire map overlays that you can put on top of each other to create this kind of dynamic zone. For example, if a scene has like illusion or something, you can put one piece on top of another, or like they fall through, a pit or something. There's a few, it's not a whole ton, but there's a few of those here and there, which is really cool, and just a lot of, helpful getting started tips. Even like, hey, if you're going to run it on like Discord or something, then you need to turn off the stuff in Roll20, which just, very obvious stuff for me but I can see why that's very useful to have for new players. It also does have pre-generated character sheets, but I was disappointed that these sheets don't actually have their own token art and only have like a sentence or two of information. So very, very bare bones. These are level 1 characters, and that's kind of like the one thing I would want them to do if you really want to jump in and start playing, would be having token art available. So that's a bummer that this doesn't have that. The introduction is basically, oh, by the way, huge spoilers for Scarlet Citadel. Obviously I'm doing this for DMs. I do love this map though. It gives you a great example of the different like biomes and levels of this dungeon. There's 6 total levels as the players make their way deeper into this area. But from a quest hook and overall like reason to being there, this is where the campaign, and I feel like a lot of mega dungeons really falter. Like, and granted, it is hard to create a compelling story campaign when you're just diving deeper into this dungeon. Like, but even here, like the BBEG, I guess, it doesn't even have like a big world-ending plot. It's just like there's a bad dude who kind of comes from a long line of this family. There's a big long like history about the town and stuff, which frankly is kind of boring and you don't really need to know for this adventure. Just paragraphs of stuff that I glossed over. And he's just kind of chilling down there doing some experiments, and that's not good. But there really isn't a big like compelling problem, I think. In fact, the hooks it gives you, the example hooks, are basically to rescue 2 people who were recently kidnapped, which that's a decent hook. But they're both found on level 1. So once you find them, I wish the book did a better job of like seeding the fact that there's like deeper and darker stuff happening, and it's more like serious, and maybe there's, I don't know, cracks, like you just don't get a lot of the real motivation and reason, other than the fact that, hey, there's a dungeon, we're adventurers, it's what we do, we should just do it. I was hoping it would do a few more things along that line, and it really doesn't. But again, a good DM, I think, could read the whole thing, get to the end, realize what's happening, and then you can kind of see these problems and things happening throughout, and maybe that adds some better motivation for the players to actually, get down there and plumb the depths and explore. But you just have to know that it's going to be a weak introduction to get involved in this. The town gets some really awesome, like 3/4 perspective or isometric view map art here of Red Tower. This is not like a Phandelver where there's a lot of fun NPCs and there's a lot of little side quests and stuff to do, which I was kind of hoping they would do, and they really don't. There's like maybe, you know, 2 or 3 people that are worth talking to. In terms of quests, there's not anything here. The only interesting thing is there's like an old man mage who can sell you items, and they're like they're I guess a little bit cheaper, but they have like a finite use to them, which the players don't know about because he expects nobody to come out of there. And it's kind of the actual castle ruins are like a tourist trap, so it's kind of like the town. I mean, it's a logging town. It's not just about that, but like they just acknowledge the fact that people go down there, kind of similar to the Yawning Portal, I guess, tavern, where it's like, yeah, people go down there and they don't really come up, so we have a town around here, so that's fine. The first level is the castle ruins, which only has like an owlbear wandering around and then some harpies in there. But this is a good example of showing off one of the overlay maps. So like this level is beneath this one. So if they fall through, you could either just move their tokens here, or if you wanted to, you could actually grab this entire map and like put it underneath, which is pretty gnarly. So I haven't seen a whole lot of Roll20 stuff do that. I wish we saw more of it, which would be awesome. But I really like that they kind of went above and beyond in terms of creating those map layers specifically for a virtual tabletop. In fact, I really feel like in a lot of ways this might have been made for a virtual tabletop specifically. Level 1 is a literal dungeon where the boss is the jailer, and it's like a torture dungeon. They've recently kidnapped people, which are the people that you might have your quest hook for, so you can find them fairly quickly after descending into the. I mean, there's the entrance is right here, so you basically find them almost immediately, which is, I don't know, for a big mega dungeon, that seems a little bit of a waste to put them right at the entrance. There's only 3 real enemies here, and one of them can be reasoned with, which I appreciate. And there are a good amount of social encounters the party can do, including having different allies who are duplicitous or dubious. Not a whole lot of people you can just straight up rescue other than these 2 that might be just naive and sweet. You might kind of have to work your way with some more nefarious people. There's a really creepy room here with people's on chains hanging down. There's a good amount of artwork that you can use. In fact, there it is. There's the picture. Look at that. Really great art for some of these rooms that really can bring the whole scene together. And of course, these animated zombies when you go through. There's a giant hook that goes down into like level 4, I think, that like feeds off the bats in that level, so players could drop down there and just die, I guess, immediately. And this is part of how each of these biomes and levels is very distinct and different. So this one just feels like kind of the lower level of a castle, basically. Once we get to level 2, then we get to an ooze laboratory run by kind of a mad scientist who's doing her own thing. She's not even that evil, really. She just wants to be left alone, this Danaska. There is somebody who's more evil here, though. This Kagoth Z, who is working for our big bad evil sorcerer guy down on level 5. And you can meet his minions. There's him, and then I think there's one on level 4 who works for him directly. So they're definitely want to stop the party. But you still don't get a whole lot of like, ideas of what exactly is going on down there. But this is a really neat, we got some magical stuff going on and some oozes that can specifically, make their way through certain areas. And the Roll20 version does a great job of giving you the actual, room by room breakdown. You get the cool map right here that you can blow up. It's very long and involved with some of these areas, and traps can be very complex, but also there's a nice part where it says, the overall features of this room and what's going on and how the party is supposed to approach it. And then there's even a restocking section, which is what happens if the party retreats and has to, go back to town to long rest and they come back. How does the dungeon actually react to that? Because things don't just pause for them to do that, which I do appreciate that there's a whole notes for a lot of the levels on simply restocking the dungeon. Level 3 is the dwarven barracks. I believe this is the one that you can actually download for free on Roll20, by the way. I think you can get this whole level, which is, there are no more dwarves here. They've been taken over by trollkin, which are essentially the orc stat block from what I can tell, but with like a little bit of troll regeneration. And this one also plays out a lot differently than other levels. In fact, it actually says that at some point. It's like, this is not your normal dungeon crawl here. While running this level, keep in mind, isn't meant to play out like a standard dungeon crawl. Inhabitants don't sit in one place waiting to be found and killed. They move around constantly in the process of going around their duties, and the Lich Hounds are adept at sniffing out intruders. There are too many enemies here, and they're too well organized for a small party of 5th level characters to sight through in one go. So the balance is very tight here, where even the designers are like, look, this is not meant to be a hack and slash. If they've been hacking and slashing their way through the dungeon, this one they have to be wary because the enemy is smart. This is the enemy's lair, and they're gonna like attack the players with everything they've got. And the party is designed to have to like flee and retreat. Yeah, the character should never be allowed to rest and recover anywhere near the Citadel. As long as they remain in the neighborhood, they can only grow weaker, while the Trollkin pursuers continually replenish their forces with fresh replacements. The only place character is guaranteed to find refuge is back in Red Tower. The Trollkin do everything in their power to kill their enemies. The sooner the players understand this, the more likely their characters are to survive. That's awesome. So again, this is like a much more hardcore dungeon crawling experience. There's a lot of cool traps everywhere. You can see the map art is amazing. This is, I believe, Kobold Press's main artist, John Pintar, has been doing map art for Kobold Press for years and years, and I absolutely adore it, and it looks fantastic on Roll20. But I appreciate that this one is different than like the other levels because it is meant to be a very hack and slashy and kind of a war, honestly, like a siege thing. And then there's a part 2. Once they reach this lower right corner, they actually enter into another area, which already that was a 20-room like dungeon, and now they're going to enter, I think, like a 10-15 room dungeon, which is way more supernatural and involves these like swarms of insects that can stealth and kind of, it's almost like playing aliens at that point. Like they ambush the party. There's these like cool floating pools of water that are actually like overlapped with like just parts of the ocean in different parts of the world that are like floating in the water. And there's giant octopus. There's a big like terror garg octopus at one point in the corner that they can battle. Like just very cool stuff going on here. And this is still the same level, so just a giant ass extra big level. Level 4, the Bat Caverns. This one also plays out differently because there are 2 different ways the party can actually do it. Option 1 is just going through and battling their way through everything, which it says you can do, but the different factions are not allied with each other. There's 3 distinct factions here, and each of those factions should be like a self-contained battle, because otherwise the party will just absolutely die if they trigger everything. The more interesting thing to do, though, is that the party can actually work it through a social angle because the 3 factions do not like each other. They're basically 2 factions of Darrow, which are these insane, like kind of deep gnome-ish race in Midgard that is literally completely insane. And one of them worships the bats in these caverns. They're called the Bat Caverns, and literally it says the bats are like a zombie apocalypse. Like they never end. The bats are everywhere, but the real threat are of course, the people. There's one faction of Darrow that worship the bats, and there's another faction of Darrow that don't worship the bats, basically, and they kind of hate each other. And then the third faction is a agent of the main big bad evil guy she summons like demons and stuff, and she keeps everybody kind of in play. But clearly that Darrow would want to work against getting rid of her for sure. So, a smart and clever party could take advantage of that and like work against these factions, and that's where the delicate balance come into play. I do like that at one point it says, see if I can find that. Yeah, I can't railroad characters in this kind of action. Maybe it's under features. Oh yeah, some groups of players are not cut out for or not interested in the kind of role-playing challenge of using diplomacy, intimidation, and subterfuge to play the factions against each other and defeat them one by one. This might sound cynical, but long experiences show that trying to shoehorn players into an intricate style of play they dislike and have no aptitude for is usually counterproductive. I appreciate there's a very frank discussion here from like the designers to the DM. For them, we offer a more straightforward situation in which it's possible for characters to infiltrate the first group, slaughter everyone, smash into the second group, slaughter everyone, and smash into the third group, and maybe slaughter everyone, or maybe the party be the ones getting slaughtered at that point. By the end, they'll certainly be covered in something, whether it's glory or ignominy, depends on whether the characters really are the badasses they believe themselves to be. That's fantastic. So I like the designers are very frank and honest about like, look, this is how we think it should be played this way, but we can't ever, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. A classic kind of D&D idiom where you can provide the players with these options and even tactical benefits, and of course they can muck that up pretty quickly. But the option is there, and I appreciate that this area again plays out because there is no like diplomacy with the dwarven barracks area at all. It's like all nasty enemies the party has to work against, whereas this one, in fact, coming off of that one is probably smart because now in this one they'll be like, all right, there's people we can talk to, let's try to talk to them and see what we can do. And then the DM gets to role play all these like very insane creatures, which is fantastic. And I think this book does a great job of organizing everything very well and making sure the DM is well aware of how that works. Level 5 is the Black River, which is literally like the river Styx going through this dungeon. In fact, there's a cool boat token that's already here the players can take. There's a ferryman and they can kind of swim their way through, or not swim, don't want to get in that water. Take the ferry through this level, and there's a lot of really crazy cool monsters here from like, I recognize some from like Tome of Beasts, for example, the various Tome of Beasts that have been released. The actual like main story villain is here, which in fact, instead of having an overlay, they have an entire separate map because he's got his, you can see there, it's the illusion magic that he's got, the reality bending magic. Due to this place being like a conflux of ley lines and shadow roads and the Black River, like all these things are happening here, making this a very like potent magical spot. And he's like descended from a long line of like wizards who like study this area. But I don't know, he's a weird character. He's just kind of, he's not a mustache twirling villain, which I appreciate, but he's almost too chill. Like he just kind of tells the characters, hey, there's something on going down in level 6 that I could use your help with. In fact, I think that'd be a great twist, is if the party got a message to come help and nobody in town never found out who would help, but maybe they recognize the name, like, oh shit, that's somebody like in the dungeon. They go down to the dungeon and they get all the way to the bottom, and this guy who's kind of the BBG, but kind of gives them the final quest of like, yeah, you need to go into the final level and actually destroy this disturbance. And his motivation is he just wants to like see what happens. I don't know. It's very odd. Like he's just kind of a researcher. He's not even really has any kind of like world domination plans or anything. I mean, he's Gellert the Gruesome, but it even mentioned the fact that like he's perfectly normal looking dude. So I feel like there was more we could do here. But you meet him and he basically just tells you like, yeah, get down to level 6 and deal with that. And so there's different paths to get to the 6th level, which I appreciate. You know, getting your way through certain monsters. At one point you can pit 2 nasty undead like boss level enemies against each other, the River Lord and the Shadow Lord, I believe they are, or it's some lich creature. And if you meet you meet the lich before the other one, it's really bad, and they're like magically protected by this chain thing. It gets really nuts on this level, which in the best way possible. In fact, there's a whole thing where if you want to follow this like deep one group of creatures, you can go off onto this entire second area, which you can rotate this map around. In fact, you can rotate chunks of the map. See how they're not connected here? They're literally, you can take this map and like rotate and fit it however much you want onto the ends of the river to create these other areas in case your players just want to keep exploring and following up on stuff, which is crazy cool. Like usually, you know, when you have those moments in a 5e campaign, and you know, and I've countless 5e dungeons I've seen where they have paths leading out, and the description just says, oh, this is outside the context of this adventure. Well, this one actually follows up on one of those, which is amazing. Like, hey, if you want to keep following, we've got like content for that, which is crazy fun. You want to fight like a fucking Shoggoth being summoned by the deep ones, you can absolutely do that just for shits and giggles. And then the final level at the very bottom, at the conflux of all these ley lines and magic and everything, is a 10-foot wide sphere of annihilation with a voidling inside, which we know that things aren't supposed to exist within spheres of annihilation, so that's kind of crazy. And the party is supposed to destroy, they obviously can't destroy the sphere of annihilation. In fact, it's doing all kinds of crazy things, like it's spewing lightning bolts and creating necrotic bursts and doing all this stuff for a crazy big boss fight. Now, you know, we're level 10-ish, so it's not like super nuts, but it is very, very challenging for that level. Again, I think Kobold Press really ratchets it up the challenge level quite a bit there. But the goal is to defeat the Voidling as a final boss, which it doesn't look like its stats are that crazy, but again, in the context of this fight, it's got a lot of extra stuff going on. And then once the party destroys that, of course, there's other things in this dungeon, all the different paths the party takes. They have to deal with other different elemental areas and icy areas. There's a cool genie character the parties can actually free and ally with, which is pretty nifty. Then they basically get ambushed by Gellert, who can kill them at some point, like when they come back up to level 5, which that feels very weird. And there's no conclusion section either. That's just kind of the end of the adventure. And it's not like this was really bothering anybody at the time, which is the weird thing. Like there's just no, I don't know, like you did all that and you come up to the surface and it's just like, I don't know, nobody even knew what you did. You know, there's no mark on the world or anything. So for that part of the story, it just feels very odd. There's just nothing happening. There's no, I don't know. There's no consequences if you didn't do this, you know, like that's something that the 5e campaigns at least do a good job. It's like, oh, we're saving the world from this specific threat. And so obviously now we've saved it. Whereas here it's like, this was just kind of, I mean, maybe someday it would have been a nasty threat, but it just didn't seem to really do much in the context of this story necessarily. But from a dungeon crawling point of view, there's a lot of cool stuff here. You can see where each biome is very different and interesting. And it just does a really cool job of providing just enough, I think, of the social role playing, of a lot of like traps and secret doors and stuff. There's multiple paths, but it does a good job of when you've got these big branching multiple path dungeons. I'm always worried about the party beelining their way to like the boss or to the exit. And I think this does a really great job of making sure that like you start in one corner and the exit's in this corner. I can't quite see where my hands are. And then but there's multiple branches, so you can never quite beeline your way to you can never shortcut your way too soon. You're always going to experience some stuff in between, but still have a lot of agency for the party to be able to choose their own path and figure out where to go next. So for that reasons, I think it's pretty dang interesting. All right, let's go over my pros, cons, and final thoughts for the Scarlet Citadel. Pros: DM tips, tutorial, and overlays specifically for teaching and expediting play on Roll20. This is one of the most impressive adventures purely from its adaptation into Roll20 that I have ever seen. That is saying something, because I've reviewed a lot of products on Roll20, and this has done one of just the best jobs I've ever seen. Not only does it obviously look great, but just all of the extra little stuff, all the overlays, all the tokens that are on there, all the way it has all these tips and pages for helping the DM get started and running everything. Like, I just haven't seen really anybody else put this much effort into making sure their adventure looks and runs as well as it possibly could in this specific virtual tabletop. So just huge hats off to that. Pro: each dungeon level is distinct and ecologically well designed, and by that I mean it makes sense where everything is. It kind of makes sense that each enemy is specifically sequestered in their various areas or their various levels. I like the fact that the BBG has agents in other levels as well to kind of keep those areas in check and under his thumb, which I think works out very well. So it doesn't have like, oh, you step out and it's suddenly like icy caves or something. With the one caveat of the final level, which is meant to be it's literally called the like elemental maelstrom or something, where like the sphere of annihilation and all the different things coming together are causing all these magical effects to look different within a single level. But otherwise, everything just kind of makes sense. This level was eventually carved into dwarven barracks, beneath this castle, and that leads, of course, to the caverns. And it happens to be this magical, like supernatural black river is also cutting through here. Like, everything is set up in a way that that makes a lot of sense while still being very interesting to explore. Pro: I think it has a solid balance of combat exploration and role playing for a mega dungeon, right? Like, you're not going to get a lot of like social opportunities. It's not like you're going to politicking with different factions or something. That part's not really going to happen very much in the context of a mega dungeon. But when you do have it, I think there's, obviously plenty of hack and slash opportunities, explorations off the charts, because players are just moving around doing all the things, from their agency. And then the role playing, I think there's just enough stuff. I wish there were maybe a few more captive people you could rescue, maybe from town. Maybe that's something that I would add, and it would add more agency to, or add more motivation for the players within the dungeon. But there is enough stuff in there. There's like at least a couple people, with maybe the exception of the third level. I think there's people that the players can talk to and possibly even ally with, at least temporarily, on each of these levels. Even level 6 has the genie that they can rescue. So I think that's a really cool aspect, and something that I definitely look for in all the big dungeons. And pro: amazing map art. This looks absolutely stellar and awesome, and something I have come to expect from Kobold Press's stuff, which is that they all look incredible in a virtual tabletop because of their awesome map art. And also all of the creatures they use, which are, I didn't actually look at the creature total, but maybe it's like 50% D&D 5e creatures and maybe 50% Kobold Press creatures. I'm not actually sure of that, but all those creatures will have, in fact, it might be more Kobold Press creatures, because all of them have the official token art. And I think if they use something, they don't only have access to like the SRD version arts from the monster manual. So it might actually be primarily Kobold Press creatures, which is smart, because then we've got all this awesome token art. So that's all a huge thumbs up. Cons: as a mega dungeon, it just doesn't try to fix the fact that mega dungeons typically have weak stories, and this one is no different than that. Unfortunately, it lacks side quests. It lacks any kind of real plot development, frankly. The only interesting thing from a story standpoint is when they get down to like the big villain, he's actually just going to chat with them and tell them to go take down a bigger threat down beneath. But then his motivations are also like he's just kind of a curious researcher. He's not even really up to any like bad shenanigans necessarily. And so there's not like compelling plot hooks. Like there's just nothing a lot there. And that's, again, all of that is stuff I think with a few little tweaks here and there, a solid DM can make a better story of, but you're still up against the fact that it's just a linear dungeon crawl in the end. And the other con I want to point out is I do think it's a big disadvantage that the pre-generated characters, for all of the excellent, like, way this can be a starter adventure for you to just plug in and everything's ready to go, and they give you all the hints for a DM and for like new players and stuff, is we don't get token art for the pre-generated characters, and that seems like such an obvious thing that you would need to give us. It just doesn't. This doesn't look good and doesn't work as a usable token. So I don't know why they couldn't go above and beyond and just give us just a little bit of art right there, if we want to use these pre-generated characters. Otherwise, we're on our own for making player characters. All right, final thoughts for Scarlet Citadel. The rare mega dungeon done right, the Scarlet Citadel doesn't necessarily fix the primary problem behind giant dungeon crawls, i.e. the story, but provides ample opportunity for hacking, slashing, stealthing, talking, and exploring its depths. Thank you to everyone for watching this D&D review. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to Platinum Patrons, Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brandon, Zenicider, Roleplay, Roll, Christopher, Corey, Big Nut, John F., John L., Nathan, Andrew, Stephanie, Jason, Lovey Spuds, Warden, Hail, Demon, LC, Tom, Eating the Dogs, Marcus, Snuggy, Hugo, Shay, Chris, and Matthew, and Gold Patrons, RPG, Paper Crime, Speedboy, and Yuma, Does the Lounge, Jerome, Nathan, Fascinator, Scott, Rufus, Jerry, Glenn, and Mark. Thank you all very much for your support.